Welcome to Second Look Education. I'm Amy.
And I'm Candace.
We're educators examining what's really happening in classrooms, policy, and teacher preparation. When joy is treated as optional, when professional judgment is replaced by scripts, and when compliance is mistaken for quality, both teachers and children pay the cost.
This podcast is our refusal to normalize that. Are we educating for compliance or for a future of educated critical thinkers?
That question drives everything we do. Each episode starts with a real moment from education, something observed, experienced, or encountered that made us pause and ask, what's actually going on here?
We dig into the complexity, we reject false binaries, and we refuse to pretend that what we're seeing is sustainable. This is Second Look Education. Welcome back. Each week, we explore a real moment in education, something that made us pause, triggered a thought or a belief, and made us want to examine what's really happening. We're going to explore these topics and look at changes that occur when we explore it and see it a little bit differently. One of us facilitates the conversation, and each week we pick something new, and we hope that you engage with us. This week, Amy is leading us in her moment so that we can take a second look.
All right, so my moment it has to do with workbook pages. So we see workbook pages all the time in our classrooms, right? But this moment, it's an ongoing moment for us at home where my son is in second grade and he brings home his folder and his job is to unpack the folder on the kitchen table. And every day there's a stack of workbook pages in this folder. When I'm always looking at, oh, how'd you do on it, right? But when I ask him about the workbook pages, they're always the same. There's no further conversation. He doesn't want to engage with me at all about it. And that's on me too, because I don't push. I'm just looking, did he get a star? What did he miss? Things like that. But it's the prevalence and the volume of them that isn't sitting well with me. And the workbook pages, it's around the same thing where I go into classrooms all the time and I see our field students, our teacher candidates. And just last week, I went into a kindergarten classroom to see one of our student teachers, and she was filling out a workbook page on the document camera. And so she's projecting it up, and the kindergarten students are copying it down at their seats, right? And so in both of these cases where my kid brings home the folder of papers and in the classroom, everybody's doing it and they're successful, right? Like, here's the page and here's the evidence that everybody's doing school. But I don't know if anybody's really learning or understanding, and so that's what really had me thinking about what there's something else going on here. And I wanted to dive into that and think about that. So it's this idea that finished work, the evidence. I brought actually a packet of papers to show Candace what it looks like when Jack comes home from school. It's a lot of papers, mm-hmm. right? And to really think about this is evidence of school happening, but is it really understanding? Like, are they getting it? Mm-hmm. So that's what I really want.
So like authentic engagement, right? Mm-hmm. Are they engaging with the work, and what is it really? This comes back to our question about compliance, right? Is it meeting compliance, or is it a true understanding of math? And for example, the worksheets I'm looking at happen to be math.
Yeah. So like I said, this didn't sit well. It doesn't sit well, and it hasn't, right? This isn't new, but I'm not trying to be like anti-workbook. I used workbooks when I was a classroom teacher, I think they do have a place, but I think it has to do more with the system and structures that are in place that make workbooks so easy, right? It's that the page is functioning as proof of learning, and what structures are in place that make that possible, or make teachers want to use them.
Well, and then isn't there, we hear this word fidelity, right? And are we using these workbooks with fidelity? Mm-hmm. And so I know that I was in a school district at one time that for their reading program had like 4 different workbooks. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And
I think we used that one.
And I didn't use it with fidelity, But my students had huge gains, and it was because I was doing other things behind the scenes because it wasn't being closely monitored. But at the end of the year, there were a lot of empty workbook pages because they weren't what was working for my students. And I think too, there was even a program when I became a principal that was used that the teachers said to me, this isn't like matching where we're assessing children or where they should be. And we actually had a session where I said, well, rip up the books and put them in the order you need them. And so are these things happening? And what I think what you're alluding to, like, is are they guiding the instruction for more compliance, or are students engaging and working with them?
What a fortunate situation for your teachers to be in, to have you as their principal to allow them to do those things. Because like you said, when districts adopt curriculum, they pay a lot of money for those. And so it is imperative that teachers then use them with fidelity. And when we say fidelity, all we mean is complying by whatever the publisher is telling you to do. And to have some autonomy in choosing how to use them is important for teachers, right? And so let's talk about what's really going on. So it's not really about, the workbook itself. It's about, and I keep saying this, but what structures are in place, the system that is in place that makes using workbooks so easy, right? And the first thing is assessment. So our assessment systems for public schools guide our instruction because that is how we are judged. That is how our schools are classified. So whatever that assessment may be. And, I have a background in high stakes standardized assessment. So in our state right now, it's the IAR testing. But when I was a kid, it was the IGAP. When I was a teacher, it was the ISAT. But our statewide assessment, the PARC, for a little while, that was rough. But yeah, so that huge assessment system, right, where our school district and our school itself is being judged, but also our district-wide assessments, right? So your MAP data or Ames Web, or what do people use, STAR assessment, whatever your district-wide assessment, or even if we're thinking bigger kids, high school kids, the ISAT, the SAT, whatever those assessment systems shape our instruction because those are the ultimate judge. And so in those systems, learning has to be observable. And how do we do that? With evidence, with workbook pages, right?
Well, and I do want to pause there because I also want to mention who creates most of these assessments and who creates most of these workbooks. And that we can't ignore that, right? Without going too far deep down that rabbit hole, because that's a whole nother episode.
Yes.
I do want to mention that at least in our state, as of now, Pearson makes our assessment. And then who makes a lot of our workbooks. And even if they're not necessarily the ones that every school uses, it's detrimental to look forward. And what is that stamp that you need to have on there? Preparation meets compliance, all those, they call it research-based. But what does that actually mean? So I do think it's important just to kind of mention that that you should look into who's making these assessments and then who's making the workbooks that you're using.
Yeah, because they're all aligned. And the tests themselves, right? They, like Candace mentioned, the test doesn't make the worksheet. The company does, right? So it's all about this documentation so that we have the data to be able to sort, rank, and classify our children, right? And our schools and our districts. The other element I think that we're looking at with workbook pages specifically is the idea of teacher protection in this same realm of accountability. So in order for teachers to prove that their students are learning and for students to show that they are in fact learning, we need documented evidence. And the easiest way are these types of tasks, these fill in the blanks, or, even things where you have to show your work, right? But these paper pencil tasks that leave evidence, I guess. I need another word, that leave a trail of accountability, that have a record of of what kids are able to do. And so it's definitely not that teachers choose workbooks over good pedagogy. It's that we are operating within systems that make these instructional decisions the right decisions. I have to be able to show what my kids know to whomever, right? Whatever stakeholders there are, to a parent. How can I give this kid in whatever letter grades? I don't even know what's happening with report cards now. My kids get 3s and 2s. Some get A's and B's, and but how can I justify that grade, right, to a parent? I need evidence, or to my administrator. I need the evidence. And workbook pages and things like that, those types of tasks create this auditable record.
And, I was just going to mention while you were talking, some things that came to mind is the Charlotte Mason perspective, that they become a checklist.
Yeah.
Like, we have to make sure we cover this and this is done. And that leans into like education as a checklist, and all children should be at the same level, and we have to make sure we make it through and that we're at this part of the workbook by this date. And I've been guilty of this through my experience, like, oh, pacing wise, I've got to hurry up and pick up the pace. But at the same time, like, is that passive learning or is it authentic engagement? And so I don't want to say that it's always passive learning. I think it's important for us to also mention, you gave in our prior conversation, you mentioned like 2 different examples of the same curriculum being used. And I think those 2 different examples really make a difference. And
for sure, what the teacher does matters,
yes.
Right? Using a workbook page is neither here nor there. It's what we do with it that is probably the most important part, right? So let's talk about the third thing I think that's going on here is this developmental mismatch, right? Between what we know good teaching is. We know how kids learn. We actually do know this through research and theory. And so, we kind of have mentioned this before, but what we teach our pre-service teachers, right, is that learning is verbal, right? We have to be talking. It's exploratory. Dewey taught us that it's experiential, right? Vygotsky taught us that learning is social, that we construct knowledge with each other. And yet, the measurable tasks that we need, right, for our accountability structures and systems that are in place are the exact opposite. They're independent. How can you work with your neighbor and I'll be able to tell what you know, right? Or how can you, work on different tasks? How will I be able to compare those, right? So, the tasks that we're talking about in the system are independent, right? They're identical, they're permanent. They create, again, this auditable record so that we have the proof, right? And the documentation. And so we have, we continue to integrate these types of activities into lessons and our days. So we say that we value discussion and thinking and exploration, but the system only knows how to count what students leave behind, that record. Classrooms and schools organize around that very thing. But not all schools operate this way, do they?
No, they do not.
They do not, right? If workbooks and this type of work were just how school works, then we'd see it everywhere, but we don't, right? We don't see it in a Montessori type of school, right? Or a Reggio Emilia, particularly in our early childhood. They are heavy on documentation, but they're not doing a bunch of worksheets. What are they doing for documenting learning?
Well, it's a lot of authentic assessment, performance-based observation in natural settings. I mean, these are all, showing that engagement, less passive.
Yeah. The evidence looks different. And so why does the evidence look different? To me, I think it comes down to trust. Right? We are trusting that teachers are experts, that teachers have the expertise to know how to assess and to know how to measure growth. And it doesn't have to be in these hard, identical ways, that we trust that we can trust in qualitative measures in those types of schools, right? And it's different than what we see in most of our public schools, at least around here, right? Um, so if workbook type activities are more prevalent in areas that aren't very affluent, right? We see less workbook pages in schools where you have to pay a tuition, right? And so it's why is that? How, that's a big question for us to kind of think about is this difference in accountability measures in those types of schools.
Well, and I think too, like this comes down to this. I I, I want to say that I do believe that practice and applying concepts is really important, and a good workbook will help with deliberate sequencing, space for students to reinforce what's been taught. I think it's the excessive use and the over compliance that is where the issue becomes. Even the fact that we sent home workbook pages with younger elementary students, and that's the academic benefit isn't really showing much. Any thoughts on that?
Lots of thoughts on that. But yeah, so, we know that children learn, like I kind of mentioned earlier, through exploring their environments and having experiences and talking and drawing and creating. And unfortunately, when it comes to a kindergartner completing a worksheet, they can barely write yet, right? And we're pushing too hard to past these developmental practices that we know we should be doing with children in the name of accountability. We have to get them ready for kindergarten. We have to get them ready for first grade. We have to get them ready for high school, for college, for life. And then we're there and it just blew past, right? We didn't get to experience our learning and our school in these authentic ways that make learning fun, that make us want to keep coming back to school. And I know we're going to get into that a lot in many of our episodes, that because joy is so important to our practice. But I guess, yeah, we don't have to be using them, but like you mentioned, there is a time and place. We're not saying throw it all away, throw your curriculum away, throw your workbooks away. It's looking at it with a lens of criticality that makes you think about what you're doing.
Well, and I think too, it might be important for you to just kind of give that example that we discussed earlier of the same workbook being
Yeah.
used in two places. Like just kind of elaborate on that, obviously without naming the specific curriculum or teacher, just sharing the two different experiences.
Yeah, so I'm in a lot of different schools seeing the same curriculum implemented, right? And often because, like we mentioned, they have to do it with fidelity, it's the same, right? And so I'm often coming to Candace and talking about how boring the lesson was or how, and it's not against the teacher at all. It's that they did exactly what they were supposed to do, right? They did exactly what the curriculum told them to do. But when we go through and for one example is, they do the question, the kids do it at their seat, right? And we did it together and they copy it down. But the other day, I was in a classroom, and usually this curriculum I see is with slides, and like I mentioned, like the teacher does a problem, the kids do it at their seat, or we do one together.
And I want to emphasize you're talking about early childhood students.
Yeah,
because that makes the difference too. Like we understand once you get to a higher level, there is some of that where you're modeling, they're trying because they have to work through problems. But I want to emphasize that you're talking about early childhood grades.
Right.
So
And
thank you.
often, like I mentioned with my kindergarten example, often the teacher is writing the answer and the kids are copying it, right? It's not even like they get the opportunity to work through it themselves and then check. But regardless, that's one way to do it. But then I was in a classroom the other day and the teacher was doing the same workbook pages that I had seen, but was engaging with the children in a much more meaningful way because she was getting at more than this just fill it in type of work that I'm used to seeing with this curriculum. And she was questioning the kids about the strategies that she was using and what she was noticing about their work. And it was through the questions that she asked that turned the workbook page on its head, right? It wasn't just this fill in the blank or fill in the problem, well, I do, you do. It was much more meaningful. And she got more out of it, more understanding of what her kids were able to do through those prompts and questions.
And so that, I mean, that speaks to teacher autonomy and empowering the teacher to say, you don't have to use these slides and you don't have to do what everybody else is doing. Do what you know works because you are the professional.
Yeah.
Yes, we're using this curriculum, we're using these workbooks. However, teach them with your background and knowledge because teachers are professionals. They went to school for this. They're licensed. It is a licensed, medical license for doctors, teaching license for teachers, and that's because they have this foundation. And when you're in a place that respects that, you can take those workbooks and say, yeah, I'm going to do these workbook pages. Maybe I don't do them all because really I don't have to. I'm doing these things in other ways. And I think that that's a perfect example of that.
So what do we do with this information now that we think about these types of tasks that are so prevalent in schools and kind of unpacked like why they're in place, right? What they do serve purposes that are larger than just your kid filling in a spelling worksheet. But how do we get at the something meaningful behind this? Because we're not going to be able to dismantle accountability systems, right? Like that's not going to happen. We're still going to have to use curriculum that's adopted and research based and all of those beautiful things that make sense on paper. They do. It's when they have to be applied with such rigor that it becomes problematic. But so I guess I want to start because it was my lens and the reason that I brought this moment up is because of the pile of papers that Jack brings home is as a parent, what I have started doing beyond, looking for how'd you do? Did you get the star? Which ones did you get wrong? That type of thing is getting more at what happened in school through questioning him and asking him things like, what did your teacher show you before this? Or did you do this with your teacher? Did you do it with a friend? Or did you do any of these, with a friend or in a group, or were they all by yourself? Other questions like, especially if I was just telling Candace this one paper here where there's eraser marks, that's a great catalyst for conversation, right? And so on this paper, Jack had drawn some circles and he had to erase. And so I questioned him, oh, what did you do here? What was your thinking here? Why did you erase? And so the explanation behind that gets at what's going on at school. It's more than just, we did this. And so through questioning, we can see if was this like a practice thing? Were they rehearsing something? Was it a new concept? Like, oh, was this hard for you? Or was it more like, I don't know. Like,
well, and it sounds like you're engaging with the work and focusing on process, not product, right? So like we teach our future teachers to look into this process, not product, because the process is the most important part. Like, what was your thinking? Because sometimes it's not something we would have even thought about, which is like kind of like this new age math is supposed to be asking about process, but also tapping into that metacognition, right? That higher level thinking. So these questions you're asking him really tap into that, like, okay, so what was your thinking? How did this go? And it's not just like, oh, good job, you got a star because you answered them correctly. It's let's engage at that higher level thinking, tapping into that metacognition. And I think that like builds it on another level. And it makes me think too that you're having these conversations with your kids. And I know that we all of us that have children, when we're at the kitchen table and we're eating dinner and we're like, how was school? Fine. What'd you do? Nothing. And so one of my favorite educators happens to be Ron Clark, and I've been to a few of his professional developments. And in that professional development, I've heard multiple times him talking about when your kid brings something from school to the kitchen table, you know that teacher has made it. And those aren't the exact words, but it's referencing that. So I think back to like when my kids came home and were excited about something in school and they couldn't wait. They brought it to the kitchen table and couldn't wait to share it. It was never like, I did great on this workbook page. It was like, we did this cool activity and It's just, I ask my pre-service teachers, I'm like, what do you remember? Like, what are some of your greatest memories? And none of them are like, we did that worksheet where we got timed, or I did great on all the packet that I got this week from the workbook. And so I think a lot of what we're doing is like asking ourselves, like, where's that middle ground so that they are bringing it to the kitchen table, that they're tapping into that metacognition, that we're asking for process because it's beyond just
this
workbooks.
Product. Yeah, absolutely. So some other ways that, and it's really I think it's the teacher mom in me. So beyond just asking him questions about the workbook page itself, is getting him to see if they can transfer this information, right? Like, did they actually learn it? Yeah. So how do we get at that is like asking them to make a problem that would be on this page, or can you make a mistake so I can find it? Or how, really important, where would this show up in real life? Like, can they make that connection? One of our favorites to tell our pre-service teachers to ask is like, what would happen if the number was this? Or what would happen if the words were different? So prompting your child to extend this or to challenge this to what's on the workbook page can really give you an understanding, or myself an understanding, of what they learned, right? And if they can, move that learning to a new situation, then there's, some value in what's going on. So, like I mentioned, the workbook page tells us that school happened. The conversation helps us understand whether learning happened, right? Okay, and for our teachers, let's think about like that teacher that I mentioned using the workbook pages. It was through her questioning and discussion that made it more meaningful. So, we don't necessarily have to throw the workbooks out, although maybe we should sometimes. Or like you mentioned, maybe we should reorganize the material. But the pages might be required, but what we do with them can really vary, right?
So I want to ask, because this might be something that comes up, and I think you're speaking a lot to intentionality and planning and preparation. And those were some of my favorite parts of teaching, like the creative side of teaching. Like the science was always really interesting, but I had a really great friend that we would pair up to plan lessons, and we would plan our Friday nights around. We were dorks, okay? I hope she hears this, but. And there might have been, some beverages involved, but we spent our Friday nights lesson planning and trying to be as creative as possible. Then we'd go in next week and implement them in our classrooms and give feedback. But the creative part was always great to me. But what would you say to a teacher who says, but the workbook is my curriculum and I don't have time to create alternatives or to customize?
It's how we use them. Use it. That's fine. Decide first what the purpose is. So knowing why you're using this workbook page is important. Because the publisher says so is not enough of a reason. So are you introducing something new? Are you rehearsing? Are you checking for understanding? Or maybe you are just creating a gradable record. I need to collect this so I can put a grade in the grade book, right? Or is this, like you had mentioned earlier, pacing alignment? Does everybody in second grade have to be on this lesson and give this workbook page and that type of thing? And those things are real. Like that happens in our schools. So asking yourself what the purpose is and getting clear about that, and thinking to yourself, if I never collected this, would I assign it? So both yes, right? Yes, I would means it's practice then, right? Maybe it's their spelling words or math facts or something. Yeah, okay, I would assign it even if I didn't collect it because I know that they just need more practice with this. If not, then it's probably just documentation, and maybe we don't need to hand that certain one out. But getting at beyond the purpose is the thinking, making kids thinking visible. So it's not just we can disrupt this fill it in, turn it in cycle through our questioning or through our prompts or how we help kids engage with a workbook page. So we can do this by helping kids self-assess, right? So yeah, okay, they have to fill out the workbook page, but can you identify one problem or one question or one prompt or whatever that you could come up and teach to the whole class because you know it so well. It was so easy for you, or you were really good at, you're the expert, right? Or identifying a question or a prompt that was challenging for you or that you needed help with. So helping kids facilitate a self-assessment, right, of their work.
Which again goes back to that metacognition and then higher level thinking and goes into that long term and applying to life. So again, just bringing this all back to like, is it just for now or is this something they need to know forever?
The other way that we can think about engaging kids with workbooks is to support critical thinking and problem solving through that transfer that we kind of mentioned before, that writing a new problem, especially for your early finishers. They need something to do. Flip over the workbook page, right? And write down a new problem for your friend. Try and trick your friend. Or, can you come up with a question that doesn't have an answer? Or one of my favorites is you finished, your friend, all of the friends are finishing. Go find someone that has a different answer than you and figure out why. And we're getting into we're getting social, right? But we're looking at other people's perspectives. They're getting at how they might solve or how they came to that justification in their answers, right? And so we don't have to necessarily change the workbook page, but maybe we can change what it means to finish the workbook page. And the other thing I think that teacher that I mentioned before did really, really well is she signaled to the kids what she valued through the way that she engaged with them. It was so much of, oh, I noticed that what you did here. I noticed what you did here. Why did you do that? Tell me more about the strategy that you used. Tell me why you didn't do it this way. And so, getting back to the way that you probably were prepared in teaching to ask those kinds of questions and go back to that, teachers, what you're doing. And sometimes we get so caught up in a program. I know, especially I can remember getting a phonics program and we were supposed to do it with such fidelity, right? And just reading it like a script, and it felt so inauthentic to what I knew I should be doing or what I wanted to do. And so I definitely, my own questioning or my own agency in what I was doing fell to the wayside.
Well, and don't you think that's partly what happens with these is, in this case, workbooks, right? You have to follow the pacing. You're being assessed this way. This is what your entire team, if you have a large team, is doing. This is what we all share together. Sure. And teaching is an overwhelming task anyway. I mean, there's a lot of other factors than just even the teaching part. And so it's almost as though you fall victim to and I don't want to say victim because teachers can be empowered and it comes through that autonomy, but you just get into, well, this is what everyone's doing, so I'm jumping on board, and it's getting us the criteria we need to look like we're doing well. And my students are well behaved, and I'm checking all these boxes, so why would I change it when in fact you're bringing a perfect example of our teachers know how to do this. They just lose sight of it when all these other things come down the pipeline. And a good teacher will naturally do those things, but it's very easy to become discouraged when you have to get into that compliance. Those are often the teachers can get pushback. I mean, I've seen administrators do it where they're like, well, yeah, she's doing great and her children's are reaching this level, but she's not working as fast as the rest of the team, and they all have to take this assessment by this day. And so it starts to play into that teacher empowerment and autonomy and those outside voices, right, that tell teachers that they're not the experts and that sort of thing.
So I think this lends itself to the deprofessionalization of our field, right? We don't trust teachers, and we build curriculum and systems that hold them accountable.
Yeah. And hold them accountable for the wrong reasons, compliance, right? And so we're not saying we agree with that. Just to note, we're saying this is a systemic issue, right? And teachers are the experts. And I'm sure we'll get into that whole deprofessionalization in another episode because that's a whole nother topic.
But workbook pages, can be practice, or they can be reflection, or they can just be a record
or tools, teaching tools.
Yeah. But what I'm getting at is students learn their value or what we're using them for through the ways their teachers engage with them, right? Is it just open up and do the page and turn it in, right? Or are we going to talk about what we're doing or what you're learning or extending. And so we can use them in lots of different ways, I think. They don't have to be this bad thing.
Right. And the balance between, professional judgment, teacher autonomy versus also having the tools we need to teach, right? We shouldn't have to create every single thing we do, but it's using those tools with our professional judgment and teacher autonomy.
So workbook pages, when Jack comes home and dumps all these papers on the counter, they show me that school happened, right? That there is a record of completion here. They show that he participated. And often they show correctness, right? They show how well he did, but they don't get at what we hope school hours are filled with, right? Confusion and discussion and persistence and reflection and conversation, what we want to see our kids doing in school. But the workbook pages don't show that. So, I keep coming back to this idea that school systems need reliable proof, right? And the proof comes from these easy to maneuver type of tasks.
And I'm going to be honest, I've been in schools before where parents have come and said that there aren't enough at your seat workbook pages, even in the younger grades. And I've had to explain to them why that's not the only focus. That's not the only sign of learning. And I don't mean that as an insulting thing. I mean it as, if you are not in the profession, as we talked about in the first episode, there's like a language and a way of teaching that you don't necessarily understand with the art of teaching. And so there's more than just what's on pen and paper, and what comes across. And what I'm hearing you saying is that you're not saying workbooks are inherently bad. You're saying to also personalize, to connect to your intention and to build on that metacognition, and to build on the teacher's autonomy and the teacher's input and art of teaching.
Yeah, they are the experts. And I don't think that we use workbooks because teachers think they're the best way to learn, right? It's because they're the easiest way to verify. So the question isn't really about workbooks. It's this. It's when evidence becomes the priority, what parts of learning quietly stop counting. It's what's missing. It's what goes away when we have our kids sitting and doing workbook pages all day long. And so once we start noticing that, I think a lot of our classroom decisions can start making more sense.
Yeah, I think that question is super important. And before we wrap up, I do want you to share what Jack was most out of this whole pile of papers. Can you please share what Jack was most excited to tell you about?
Yeah, so it's a lot of math. There's some comprehension, more math. But what he wanted to show me, what he did come and show me, the kitchen table moment, was he wrote his name in cursive for the first time. And this was a big deal. He worked hard at this, right? He had to, this was many tries. How many times did you make that J before you got it that beautiful? But this was something he had to work really hard at, right? And he was really proud of it.
And it's on a blank sheet of paper. Like just, I mean, how amazing. No. How amazing. Can you repeat your question one more time? I just want to make sure it stands out, but I did want to mention that too.
Right. So we come back to this, that it's not really about workbooks, even though that's the catalyst for all of that. And that's what didn't sit well, but we know that we have them, but it's about when evidence, right, the documentation from these pages becomes the priority, because we have to be held accountable. What parts of learning quietly stop counting? What parts of education and what we hope to see in schools have to go away because we make room for these types of things instead.
And I think this lends itself to a lot of other conversations that we're going to be having regarding curriculum and instruction and all of that. So excellent moment to bring to the table.
Thanks.
Thanks for engaging and exploring this moment with us. Remember to not be afraid to pause and take a second look.
See you next time.